What if I told you that one of Hollywood's biggest box office successes of recent years was built on a lie that destroyed three real relationships? What if I told you that the chemistry you saw between Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell in Anyone But You was so convincing because they were actively manipulating you, the audience, into believing something that wasn't real? And what if I told you that this calculated deception came at a devastating personal cost that's only now coming to light? This is the story of how a $25 million romantic comedy became a $220 million global phenomenon by weaponizing fake romance rumors, and how that success left a trail of broken hearts and shattered relationships in its wake. This is the story of the most successful PR stunt in modern Hollywood history and the real people who paid the price for it. But before we dive into the scandal that's rocking Hollywood right now, let me paint you a picture of where everyone was before Anyone But You changed everything. Picture this. It's early 2023, and Sydney Sweeney is at the peak of her career. She's coming off the massive success of Euphoria. She's engaged to businessman Jonathan Davino after a 5-year relationship that she's kept meticulously private, and she's about to star in what would become her biggest movie yet. Sydney has always been strategic about her career, but she's also been incredibly protective of her personal life. She doesn't date actors, she doesn't date musicians, she doesn't date anyone in the entertainment industry because, in her own words, she wants to be able to be normal Sid. Meanwhile, Glenn Powell is in a completely different place in his life. He's been grinding in Hollywood for years, taking supporting roles in movies like Top Gun Maverick, building his reputation as the charming, reliable guy who can elevate any scene he's in. But he's not a leading man yet, not a household name, not someone who can open a movie on his own. Personally, he's been in a committed relationship with model Gigi Paris for over 3 years. They've been talking about forever, building a life together, and by all accounts, they're solid. Gigi is 32, she's established in her own career, and she's been supporting Glenn through the ups and downs of his Hollywood journey. Then there's Jonathan Davino, Sydney's fiancé, who represents everything Sydney says she wants in a partner. He's not in the entertainment industry, he's a successful businessman from Chicago, and he allows Sydney to be herself without the complications that come with dating someone in the spotlight. They got engaged in February 2022, and Sydney has consistently talked about how important it is to have someone who lets her shine without feeling threatened or competitive. So when the casting for Anyone But You was announced in January 2023, it seemed like just another romantic comedy. Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell, two attractive actors with undeniable chemistry, starring in a modern adaptation of Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing. The budget was modest at $25 million. The expectations were reasonable, and everyone involved probably thought they were making a cute, forgettable rom-com that would do decent business and disappear. But here's where the story gets interesting, and here's where we need to pay attention to the timeline, because timing is everything in this scandal. Filming began in February 2023 in New South Wales, Australia. Now, when you're making a romantic comedy, chemistry between the leads is everything. You need that spark, that believable connection that makes audiences root for the characters to get together. And by all accounts, Sydney and Glenn had that chemistry in spades. They were comfortable with each other, they could banter naturally, and they looked good together on screen. But somewhere during those early weeks of filming in Australia, something shifted. The chemistry that was supposed to stay on camera started bleeding into real life, or at least that's how it appeared to everyone watching. Cast and crew members started noticing the way Sydney and Glenn interacted between takes. They were laughing together, spending time together off set, and developing what looked like a genuine friendship that had romantic undertones. Now, here's where we need to be very careful about what we know versus what we think we know, because what we know for certain is that during this time, Glenn Powell was still in a committed relationship with Gigi Paris. What we know is that Sydney Sweeney was still engaged to Jonathan Davino, and what we know is that both of them were professional actors who understood the importance of selling their movie. But what started happening during filming was that rumors began to circulate. not just among the cast and crew, but in the broader entertainment industry. People started talking about the undeniable chemistry between Sydney and Glenn. Photos from the set showed them looking very comfortable together, very intimate, very much like two people who were falling for each other. And this is where Gigi Paris enters our story in a way that will break your heart. Gigi, who had been supportive of Glenn's career, who had been there through the lean years, who had been planning a future with this man, started hearing these rumors. She started seeing the photos. She started feeling like something was changing in her relationship, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what. So Gigi made a decision that seemed reasonable at the time, but would ultimately lead to one of the most devastating phone calls in this entire saga. She decided to fly to Australia to visit Glenn on set. This wasn't unusual. Partners visit film sets all the time. It's normal, it's expected, it's a way to stay connected when someone you love is working in another country for months. But when Gigi told Glenn she was planning to visit, something happened that should have been a red flag for everyone involved. Glenn, who had always welcomed Gigi's support and presence in his life, suddenly became hesitant. He started making excuses about why it might not be the best time for her to visit. He talked about how busy the shooting schedule was, how focused he needed to be, how it might be better if she waited until he got back. But Gigi, who knew Glenn better than almost anyone, could sense that something was off. This wasn't the man she'd been with for 3 years. This wasn't the man who had always made her feel welcome and wanted. So she pressed the issue, and Glenn, perhaps feeling cornered or perhaps already knowing what he was about to do, made a phone call that would change everything. Picture this scene. Gigi has already booked her flight to Australia. She's excited to see Glenn, to support him on what could be his biggest movie yet, to be part of this exciting time in his career. She's probably packed her bags, cleared her schedule, and told her friends and family about her trip. And then her phone rings. Glenn's voice on the other end of the line delivers words that will haunt Gigi for months to come. The producers and I have discussed that I think it's best that you don't come to visit. Not I'm too busy, not the timing isn't great, but the producers and I have discussed, as if this decision was made in a boardroom, as if their relationship was now subject to corporate approval. Gigi's response was immediate and final. And that's when I hung up, and I was like, this motherfucker is done to me. 3 years of relationship, 3 years of supporting each other, 3 years of building a life together, ended with a phone call about producers and what's best for a movie. But here's what makes this story even more heartbreaking. Gigi later revealed that this phone call really is what broke me. I thought we had hope, like maybe when I got there that like things would maybe get better. But once I got that phone call, I just knew it was done. I had lost whoever that person was that I loved. Think about that for a moment. Gigi wasn't just losing a boyfriend, she was losing the person she thought she knew. The Glenn Powell who would prioritize producers' opinions over his girlfriend's feelings wasn't the same man she'd fallen in love with. The Glenn Powell who would make unilateral decisions about their relationship based on what was best for his career wasn't the partner she'd been planning a future with. And while Gigi was processing this devastating phone call, while she was realizing that her 3 year relationship was over, the rumors about Glenn and Sydney were intensifying. Photos from the set were becoming more frequent and more intimate. Industry insiders were starting to whisper about an affair. Entertainment blogs were beginning to pick up the story. But here's where this story takes a turn that makes it even more complex and morally ambiguous. Because what we now know, what Glenn and Sydney themselves have admitted, is that they were aware of these rumors. They were aware of the speculation. They were aware that people were talking about their chemistry and wondering if it was real. And instead of shutting down the rumors, instead of being clear about their respective relationships, instead of protecting the people they claimed to love, they made a different choice. They decided to lean into the speculation. They decided to let people wonder. They decided to use the rumors as a marketing tool for their movie. Now, at this point in February and March 2023, Anyone But You was still just a movie in production. Nobody knew it would become a global phenomenon. Nobody knew it would gross $220 million worldwide. Nobody knew it would become the romantic comedy that supposedly saved the genre. All they knew was that people were talking about their chemistry, and in Hollywood, people talking about your movie is always a good thing. But the cost of that decision was becoming clear in real time. Glenn's relationship with Gigi was over. The woman who had supported him through years of struggling in Hollywood, who had been there through the rejections and the small roles and the uncertainty, was now collateral damage in his pursuit of stardom. And Sydney, who had always been so careful about protecting her personal life, who had always insisted on keeping something for herself, was now allowing speculation about her relationship status to become part of her professional brand. The woman who had said she doesn't date actors, who had chosen a partner outside the entertainment industry specifically to avoid this kind of complication, was now at the center of a romance rumor that was threatening the very relationship she'd worked so hard to protect. Meanwhile, Jonathan Davino, Sydney's fiancé, was watching all of this unfold from the outside. Here's a man who had proposed to Sydney just a year earlier, who had been planning a wedding, who had been building a life with someone he loved, and now he's seeing photos of his fiancée looking very cozy with her co-star. He's reading rumors about an affair. He's watching the woman he loves become the subject of speculation that directly involves their relationship. But the most insidious part of this whole situation is that Glenn and Sydney weren't just passively allowing the rumors to spread. According to their own later admissions, they were actively encouraging them. They were making choices about how to behave in public, how to pose for photos, how to interact with each other in ways that would fuel the speculation. Think about the calculation involved in that decision. Think about the cold, strategic thinking required to look at your real relationships, your real partners, the real people who love you, and decide that their feelings are less important than the potential box office success of your movie. And the tragic irony is that at this point, nobody even knew if the movie would be successful. Anyone but you could have been a complete flop. It could have disappeared without a trace. Glenn and Sydney could have destroyed their real relationships for a movie that nobody saw and nobody cared about. But as filming continued through March and April 2023, the rumors continued to intensify. The chemistry between Glenn and Sydney was undeniable, both on screen and off. The photos from set were becoming more frequent and more intimate, and the entertainment industry was starting to take notice. By April 2023, Glenn Powell and Gigi Paris had officially broken up. 3 years of relationship, 3 years of love and support and shared dreams ended because Glenn had made a choice about what was more important to him. And that choice wasn't Gigi. Gigi later described this period as being shattered. She said she felt like she was fed to the dogs for the sake of Glenn's career. She said that when she tried to get respect, when she tried to get clarity about what was happening, she was told that work comes first and this is what I have to do for my job. Imagine being in Gigi's position. Imagine watching the person you love choose their career over your relationship, not in some abstract way, but in a very specific, very public way that involves another woman. Imagine seeing photos of your boyfriend looking intimate with his co-star while you're being told that you can't even visit the set. Imagine being told that your 3-year relationship is less important than what's best for a movie. And the most heartbreaking part of Gigi's story is that she understood what was happening. She wasn't naive about the entertainment industry. She wasn't unrealistic about the demands of Glenn's career. She just wanted respect. She wanted honesty. She wanted to be treated like a human being whose feelings mattered. But instead, she got a phone call from producers. She got excuses about work schedules. She got told that her presence would somehow interfere with the magic that Glenn and Sydney were creating on screen. Meanwhile, Sydney's relationship with Jonathan Davino was also beginning to show strain. While Sydney has been much more private about the details of how the Anyone But You filming affected her engagement, we know that cracks were beginning to form. The woman who had always insisted on keeping her personal life separate from her professional life was now allowing them to become intertwined in a way that would have consequences for years to come. As filming wrapped in Australia and the cast and crew returned to their respective lives, the damage was already done. Glenn's relationship with Gigi was over. Sydney's engagement to Jonathan was under strain, and the rumors about Glenn and Sydney were now part of the entertainment industry conversation. But here's the thing that makes this story so much more complex than a simple tale of co-stars falling for each other. Glenn and Sydney weren't actually having an affair. They weren't actually in love. They weren't actually planning to leave their respective partners for each other. What they were doing was something much more calculated and, in many ways, much more cruel. They were performing a romance for the cameras while their real relationships crumbled in private. They were allowing people to believe something that wasn't true because it served their professional interests. And the most tragic part is that it worked. Anyone But You would go on to become a massive success, grossing $220 million worldwide and revitalizing the romantic comedy genre. The chemistry between Glenn and Sydney that audiences fell in love with was real, but the romance that people believed was happening off screen was entirely manufactured. But the cost of that success was measured in broken hearts and shattered relationships. Gigi Paris, who had supported Glenn through years of struggle, was discarded when she became inconvenient to his career trajectory. Jonathan Davino, who had proposed to Sydney and was planning a wedding, watched his fiancée become the subject of affair rumors that she did nothing to dispel. And Glenn and Sydney, who had made a calculated decision to prioritize their careers over their relationships, would soon discover that the success they achieved came with its own set of consequences. Because when you build your success on a lie, when you achieve your dreams by manipulating the truth, when you get what you want by hurting the people who love you, that success comes with a price that you might not be prepared to pay. As we'll see in the next part of this series, the real cost of the Anyone But You marketing strategy was only beginning to become clear. Because while Glenn and Sydney were celebrating their box office success, the people they had left behind were dealing with the very real, very human consequences of their choices. And Gigi Paris, the woman who had been fed to the dogs for the sake of a movie's success, was about to break her silence in a way that would expose the true cost of Hollywood's most successful PR stunt.